expertise and your insights. And we look forward to talking about all the range of issues. There are going to be a lot of difficult issues to talk about in this process, and we're really appreciative of you being here and being willing to have those conversations. And I also want to just let you know that on behalf of Donnie Oliveira, our director, he wanted to be here as well, but he's actually out of town for a work-related conference, and so he couldn't be here today. But he wanted me to also send his, his regards and to let you know that we all think this is a very important process. So, with that, I will turn it over to Tom.
Okay. And you can do it. There we go. Okay, so for today, the purpose of this meeting was really to be about context setting, and we wanted to do some introductions, talk about, as Patricia just introduced, some of the purpose of this work group, really get a grounding on where we're at with the EOA, and talk a little bit about the policy context that we're working from, and then get into a little bit about what is the EOA, and then Steve's going to present some data, some of which many of you have seen before on recent economic trends. Steve's done some updates with recent job and other indicators, sort of with the recovery coming out of the pandemic. So we'll review that. This first part, we have a couple of different sections, so maybe I'll just roll through 3 or 4 slides and we can pause for discussion, see if anybody has any questions or points they want to make. And again, as Patricia said, the purpose of this group is to be a sounding board for us, that we're going to bring to you over the next 4 months the preliminary drafts, the pieces of the EOA, the policy decisions that are rely in a certain aspect on the EOA to you for discussion. We're, as you will see here in a moment, we have different policy directions that sometimes go in different directions, and we need to figure out how to balance and do our best to achieve both. And so we're looking for guidance from you, but at the same time, we're not trying to make a decision. We're not looking for consensus. We're hoping to identify potential areas of agreement, win-win policy options, but we really want to hear from you, your issues, your concerns, what is confusing, what don't you understand, what are we missing, so that as we go through refinements of these pieces and we begin to enter a more public phase of the discussion in next spring, in early 2024, we can benefit from your insight and your comments. Just a little bit of ground rules that we have here at BPS for all of our meetings, both community meetings as well as our internal meetings, is we really want to encourage people to listen to understand, and not necessarily immediately respond or react. We also want people to pause and wait and ask, why am I talking? And we want everybody to assume good intentions of everybody in the room. And also, be willing to make mistakes and be forgiving of those who do. We're all trying to do better, and we're all trying to learn from each other. to create better policy for the city. And then I think, allow for and appreciate the disagreement on options or ideas, and do it in a respectful manner. One of the reasons we brought everyone together in the room, in the virtual room, is to be able to hear from each other and not have these separate siloed conversations. This is one thing that Sarah especially brought to us early on in wanting to have everybody in the room so we can hear from each other in real time and have a dialogue here. And then just a reminder that we are recording these discussions so people, for transparency and for people who are unable to make the meeting, they can catch up. But we really want sort of the personal stories to stay here and to take in or absorb the lessons, and to really not take things personally, but really think about where that perspective is coming from. A little bit about what we're going to try and do over the next 6 meetings with you all. So as I said, this first meeting is really an introduction, a context setting, make sure everybody's on the same page, starting from the same point. The next meeting, we're going to get into the baseline employment forecast and buildable land inventory, which is really the core of the economic opportunities analysis of the EOA. And then the two meetings after that, we're going to bring you information about 2 of the bigger policy decisions that are out there that impact our economic opportunity. And as you will learn today, within the structure of the Oregon statewide planning system, we need to make these decisions in balance and consider both natural resource protection decisions in the Columbia Corridor and along the Willamette River. At the same time, we're looking at economic opportunity and how those influence each other. And so we are allocating the better part of 2 meetings to talk about the E-zone project, the environmental overlay mapping project along the Columbia Slough. And then to talk a little bit about future projects along the north reach of the Willamette River, mainly dealing with the floodplain regulations, that the central reach is currently in front of council right now, and that the north reach will be the next phase of that floodplain work. And then we have a 5th busy meeting to talk about a lot of other things. Tree protection in the heavy industrial zone, brownfield, the opportunity for brownfield remediation and how that might unlock a lot of industrial capacity, conversions, infrastructure deficiencies that could again boost economic opportunity, and how other strategies to sort of create more economic opportunity in the city. And then finally, we'll close with a meeting around, and I'll give you again a little preview today, talking about an evaluation framework going forward and what are the key factors, key indicators, analysis that we can do that really helps get at sort of balancing these different policy objectives, and to make sure, and that again, that is make sure that we're looking at the right issues, we're bringing analysis and data around impacts to the extent that we can, and we'll sort of dig deeper into that framework. Again, this is a diagram of a typical legislative process here at BPS, where we start with a discussion draft that we publish, and the public, and we take it out to the public, and we talk about it, and the public sends staff comments, and we absorb those and make adjustments to our work, and then we come out with what we call a proposed draft. And that proposed draft is what goes to the Planning Commission. And then all of the public comments get directed to the Planning Commission. And they're the ones that get to decide and weigh and balance and internalize, and they make amendments to whatever we have in front of them. And then they make a recommendation to council, and that becomes the recommended draft. And then all of the comments get directed to council, and they are the ones who ultimately decide and decide what gets adopted by the city. That's our process. What I want to say is we are even before the discussion draft, which is why I call it and you'll see preliminary draft. This is the, we're going to bring you pieces. We haven't put it all together. And so, as Patricia said, we're still early on in this process. We've done a lot of work to provide a starting point, but we're not ready, and we haven't pulled it all together to know how all of the pieces fit together. And some of that work, like the evaluation framework, even the E-zone work, we're still working on. And so, we're bringing you works in progress. And so there's lots of opportunity to make refinements and make adjustments and be able to incorporate your comments that we get from you over the next 6 meetings. I'm going to just pause there and see if there's any questions or comments about sort of the purpose of this group, how it fits into the bigger picture, what we're trying to do here. Yeah, Bob?
Just a quick question, I guess, about, these are supposed to be done every 5 years. Obviously, it's been more than that. Are we planning for a 5-year time horizon with this process, or are we starting to build in sort of more reality that it takes a long time to put these together, that you almost have to start when you adopt? And so I'm just trying to get a sense of, what we really think this is, how long this should last. What time horizon are we really planning for realistically?
Yeah, unlike on the housing side, where there is a state mandate to do the housing needs analysis every 6 years, we have a comp plan policy, a personal city policy to do the EOA every 5 to 7 years. And I think, the Prosper Portland, as you'll see, they just did the Advanced Portland strategy. And that's more on a 5-year sort of shorter term economic development strategy. Because the EOA is a longer range, a 20+ year plan, we would like to keep it fresh and up to date, with the business cycles. As you said, it is a heavy lift. I think going forward, it's sort of we'll see, and it largely is going to be dependent on sort of other decisions that the city wants to make, such as E-zone map updates in the Columbia Slough, that is dependent on having a fresh, current EOA.
Yeah, I guess to that last point, I hope we can take it from the perspective of, what does it mean to have an up-to-date or out-of-date EOA? Because obviously this has stalled a lot of other processes. And I think we should be thinking around that time horizon. What we put into it as well, and how it's, so that it doesn't necessarily go out of date in 5 years, and then we can't really do other things.
Yeah.
Tom, can I
Yeah.
question?
Yeah.
Just, I think that will maybe elucidate a little bit more about your point, Bob, which is, I think of this as very much like the HNA on the economic side, right? And the HNA, we consider that to be like, essentially projections and forecasts for the next 20 years. So, but knowing that those projections, we never know in any given moment, how those projections are going to fare, like whether conditions are going to change significantly enough that those projections would change. And so the intervals at which you update, particularly the numbers and the projections, is just an opportunity to see how your projections were, whether there's course correction that's needed, whether there's conditions that have changed so dramatically that you need to rethink anything. So it's meant to be a long horizon, but it is something that you check in on periodically so that you make sure that all of your underlying assumptions still make sense and are guiding, actions that the city takes. Does that seem right?
But I'm not trying to, I don't want to take us on a rabbit hole, so I'll stop talking for this, but what I'm trying to get at is the way it's structured right now, it's a sort of a monumental process at some point between 5 and 7 years. And it's massive. And we've been talking about this for 2 years, right? And is there a way to frame it up such that we can create ranges and also to frame it so that we don't have to come back and do a monumental process in order to update it, that there are things we can build into it that allow us to say in 5 years, yeah, we're on track here, 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 and here, therefore it's still relevant, or we're not on track on these 2 things, we need to fix these pieces, as opposed to kind of this static document that then has to be completely rebuilt. I think that would be helpful. It just seems like an incredible amount of work, and it does clog up the works if we don't get it done.
I think it's a very good point, and it speaks to a system or process of adjustments as you go along, as opposed to getting down the road and having a big fight. I like adjustments. Yes.
Yeah.
I have a clarifying question.
Yeah.
So, and you may get into this a little bit later, but my understanding is that this is a city, we're mandated by the state legislature as a city, but a lot of the documents are now regional, like 7 county, or, it used to be 3 counties, now it's out to 7. So are we obligated to come up with a plan for Portland, or are we looking at coming up with a regional plan? Because it's really different to say what's the economic well-being of Portlanders versus saying what's the economic well-being of people in Columbia and Washington State, and how much are we obligated to take care in this plan based on the state legislature of regional. So is it a regional plan or is it Portland's plan?
It's hard. It's Portland's plan, but as we do sit in the middle of the region, and it's, Steve, what is it? It's like 60% of Portlanders work in Portland, and 60% of people who work in Portland come from outside Portland. So there's a regional context to it. And I think what we'll get into, especially, as we talk about the industrial areas and economic opportunity for people without college degrees, it's like, what is Portland's role in that within the region, and what are we going to be able to provide there, and what is going to have to sort of be reliant on the rest of the region as well. But at the end of the day, it is what goes on in Portland. Steve, did you have something to add to that?
Portland is an economic center, so much of the population are workers. Most of the workers don't live here. The daytime population are mostly people who don't live here. So there is that it's a regional labor force, essentially, for about the 7 county area. And then also the EOA is to comply with Goal 9. Goal 9 is about the economy of the state, really, and it's to look at market opportunities in different places around the state. And Portland is the big city. in the state and the big part of the regional or big part of the state economy. And so there are some unique portions of the state economy that are addressed here. So the community is large and it's
I'm sure we'll
We'll
talk
get into
about
it, yeah.
this. We'll talk about it more, I'm sure.
John, did you have something?
Yeah, I just have a question about the requirement for balance. Is that so goal or balance overall between?
Actually,
the goals?
why don't you hold that?
Am I
This is the
segueing
next
for you
section.
already?
That's a great segue.
Okay.
I wanted to see, is there anybody online that had any questions or comments at this point? If not, maybe I will, Cassie.
Yeah, hi there. I was, I think I had emailed maybe a month or two ago asking about the outreach process that happened, most recently with the Black, Indigenous, people of color groups and what that looked like, what the outcomes were, what the funding was, who participated. Didn't hear back yet, so I would appreciate getting some kind of update to the group.
Okay.
Relatively early on, like integrating that into what's going on here.
Yeah, we'll send out that. Yes, last spring, we did a couple of, I think, 4 focus groups, primarily with the Black community in Portland. They were facilitated by Camille Trummer. We utilized a grant from the state of Oregon, from DLCD, and we will send out that report with the follow-up to this meeting and as part of the agenda packet for the next meeting. Yeah, Ellen?
Do you have a timeline, a goal timeline for the process? Have you adjusted that?
We are kind of hopeful and depends on what we get done with this group over the next 3-4 months. I think what we will see is where do we stand once we finish this process with you all, and how that ideally we would be able to move forward and have pretty good agreement, and this is how all the pieces fit together, and we could get to planning commission by the summer and maybe council hopefully in the fall, like this time next year. There will be an election this time next year, and we will be changing governments, and I think every other bureau in the city is going to try and get something to council in that time frame. So ideally, yes, we would be a year from now, we would have an adopted EOA. But I don't, that's a goal. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get there. And I think it has more to do with what's going on in City Hall than what we get done. Part of it is really, can we find those win-win solutions? Can we find a balance that meets multiple policy objectives? But if it's more controversial and there's more issues to work through that slow us down, then we're probably going to miss that window with this council, and we'll be looking at spring of 25 with the new council.
I don't think we'll be looking at spring of 25 for the new council. I think, honestly, I hope BPS really elevates this one. I know housing is obviously on the forefront of everyone's mind, but part of the challenge of the EOA historically has been that it keeps getting kicked down the road, and it's not fresh years. And I think it's really important for us to go through this process that BPS really put the squeeze on council and maybe some of the people in this room too, to say it really needs to go before, because there's no way in hell a new council is going to be able to get their heads around this. Right. It won't be spring. It'll be 2 years down the road.
So I suggest we have this conversation in January when we see where we're at and we look at the evaluation framework and we look at the outstanding issues and we can see what we can get done in that 2024 timeframe.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, in the interest of time, I'm gonna move us along and talk about John's point about policy decisions and, you know, that policy, land use policy context memo that was part of the agenda packet was really designed, you know, the takeaway is that not one policy trumps the other policy, and that we really need to look at both going forward, and that at all levels, at the state level, at the metro level, and at the city level, we have policy directions that really tell us to do both, to protect natural resources and to provide for economic growth and shared economic prosperity. And that's what's going to be the challenge for us to do, and to literally navigate that and look for those trade-offs and look where we can achieve both. But that said, you know, this is an economic opportunity analysis. We are grounded in statewide planning goal 9, which, you know, basically says, you know, cities need to show or demonstrate that they have the capacity to accommodate 20 years of employment, economic growth, consistent with plan policies, and that is the whole plan. And as you will see here, you know, we have a lot of different policies that tell us to do different things. And when we did the comprehensive plan, we did not reconcile every policy and in every chapter. We left it to the individual project, the individual decision before council to do that reconciling or that balancing. You know, again, just cherry picking a few policies in our comprehensive plan around economic development, and you know, and you'll see when Steve presents some of the data, you know, it is, you know, at the core of the economic opportunity analysis is about land and development capacity aspects of it, of economic growth. If you think about, you know, what is the economy, you know, we have businesses, we have labor, and they're all doing that in some sort of building space. And this is about the space part of that equation. And really where the EOA comes into play is anytime, any decision that where we touch the zoning map or the zoning code that can have an impact on the employment land or employment capacity is where we look to the EOA to assess the impact to that. And then back to the goal 9, can we still demonstrate to the state or whoever that we still have the capacity to meet our forecasted employment needs. Same is true on the natural resource side. You know, we have a lot of direction to protect the natural resources, to look at the impact development has on those resources, and to come up with a scheme to protect the most significant natural resources in the city. A little bit about sort of when we do make a decision and balancing, and really, you know, it's not looking at one individual policy, but it's looking at the plan as a whole, and it is equally or better supporting the plan, then that can be equally or better supporting the plan with mitigation. So if we're going to have a negative impact on any of the policies, how can we minimize or mitigate that impact? And then, there is, when you get deep in the weeds with a decision, these factors here, the facts, the verbs, and what we call specificity is around, what are the facts, acres of impact, jobs or habitat or whatever, those are the facts. We're going to do 100 acres of impact on X. The other, what we really get into, and when we did the comprehensive plan, we spent a lot of time on the verbs in those policies. And there is a hierarchy of verbs. And some of them are aspirational. Encourage. That's a little softer than, it escapes me right now as to what a require. But there are stronger verbs that provide more of a stronger direction, like do this. And if you can't do that, you better have a good reason and good explanation or mitigate it to try and do something different. And then specificity is about not all of the policies apply to all of the situations. And so we'll sort of quickly get down to, like in the previous slide, a few key policies that need to be addressed when we look at sort of the trade-offs that we make or set up through this EOA process. A little bit about the evaluation framework that we'll pull together. We are sort of grounding it or using the framework in the comprehensive plan. There's up front, there is what's called the guiding principles. There are 5 areas here that cover sort of the range of policy decisions. And what we're going to be looking to is to come up with either a quantitative or a qualitative measures or indicators to describe, as we look at combinations of policy outcomes, different levels of economic growth, different levels of resource protection, how that combination fits together and what we think it means for environmental health or for equity. And when we bring that and dig deeper into that framework, that's what we're going to be looking for you. I think it speaks to Bob's earlier comment. What are good indicators? What can we do? And then what is a reasonable amount of analysis that says, yeah, that gives us a sense of what the impact is going to be. One example I like to use is, say between a high and medium natural resource protection. We're going to be able to quantify the number of acres that are protected or the number of acres of employment land that are impacted. We're not going to be able to tell the water temperature in the slough benefit or detriment from something like that. We're not going to go through a sophisticated modeling that will take years to set up and do. And so we're going to be looking from you, sort of what are those indicators and what is a reasonable sort of depth to that analysis to understand what these trade-offs are. Just one more thing here. Just we had some questions. There are a couple of other economic development plans that are out there that are in the region. The Greater Portland Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy is a regional strategy. Metro and Greater Portland Inc. put that together. It provides some rather broader, loftier goals for the regional economy. It's largely used to qualify the region for federal grants. through the,
Community block grant?
no, it's the EDA, Economic Development Agency grants. There's also Advanced Portland, which is the Prosper Portland 5-year shorter term economic development strategy. I would say Advanced Portland, there are a lot more common themes that you will see as we go forward in terms of target industries, shared prosperity, and that but they are looking. Prosper is looking at more of the how can we support business, what is the workforce development aspects of these things, whereas our work as a planning agency and the EOA is more about that land capacity and what are those impacts. But there is overlap between those two. So, Bob.
Yeah, one thing I struggle with in these processes is that by its nature, we tend to sort of do the economic side of the analysis first, and then we try to figure out what else we can kind of squeeze in. So it's kind of like we need this for the economic development, and that's inherent in Goal 9, and I get that. But I do think one thing that would help in this process, especially in the most conflicted landscapes, when we talk about the North Reach, we talk about the Columbia Slough, to the degree I think we can get on the table the aspirations for the other things that we want in as hard a terms as possible early. I think that would make it a much better process. I kind of hesitate to invoke the ghost of Ann Gardner, but I remember her asking like 20 years ago, one of these processes, how much is enough? What's going to make you environmentalists happy and go away? And I think we can actually answer a lot of those questions. This is what we like to see. It may not be possible, but this is the goal. We'd like 50-foot setbacks. We like floodplains protected. On the recreation side, we like 5 access points to the river, something like that. I think the more we can get those on the table on these discrete landscapes in hard terms, the better conversation we'll have. That doesn't mean that we can get to all those things, but I feel like right up until the end, we deal in this very sort of theoretical universe that doesn't marry into the landscape. That people put on the table, I think about the recreation piece. We want 5 access points on the river. I'm just making that number up. Now you have a target. Now you can kind of start to mess with the maps in real time and go, well, we can find 3 and maybe we can find 4. And so I just hope we do that early rather than at the end, if that makes sense.
If I could follow up on
Yeah.
what Bob just said, it's very hard for any of us to have a crystal ball, but along those lines, there are, dealing in the environmental world, we know that the last 50 years of how we've dealt with environmental regulations and environmental protection is going to be vastly different than the next 50 years. And so to the extent that we can, also try and, none of us have a crystal ball, but try and understand those factors that are going to impact things. Like the pandemic, it's sort of interesting. In October of 2019, I went to a conference, and conference they said the things that are coming for us are warfare, food insecurity, climate change, a pandemic. 3 months later, pandemic. So as much as we can, trying to get out of the context of things are static and we're planning based on what we sort of see now. I think moving into the future, especially with climate change, we're going to be much more into a sort of triage mode. And so trying to think of those factors as we move forward. And I'll just, say again, we don't have a crystal ball, but trying to think of things that will add stress to this process may help us sort of plan a little bit for that, not fully, but a little bit.
It's just you've walked through a lot of stuff that I think is hitting around this, but to both of those comments, I really want to get real clarity on those 4 versions of this plan that you lined up in the timeline at the beginning, which now the 5th is a preliminary plan. What is in that document? Like, what is the outcome of this conversation? Because I guess I'm very much hearing what both of you just said. And I'm also trying to understand that, like, this is the economic opportunities analysis. So having that analysis then paired with those inputs probably prepares us for a conversation that happens at that point, unless I'm understanding that what is being developed in this process is different than that and has more in it than the framework suggests. So just understanding what is intended to be in this actual document that will eventually be presented.
So I think, and this sort of harkens back to the experience 12 years ago along the North Reach plan, is that we're trying to do both at the same time, and that both sort of figuring out the future natural resource protection direction, as well as and being able to incorporate that into the economic vision that underlines the EOA. And as you will see here in a moment, that really sort of leads us back to the industrial areas, because that's where we have the confluence, literally, of the slough and the river and the industrial development. And that's our shortest supply, because we can't really go up with industrial. It's the most land intensive. And so to do both in that area, we need to come to an agreement of what does that mean to do both, and how much are we going to do of both? How much economic opportunity, how much future growth is possible, how much natural resource protection? That's really where it all comes together. And then we pull in this sort of other policy goal around economic prosperity and shared prosperity, especially for Portlanders without a college degree, which have a lot of opportunity in the industrial area, that if we're not going to be able to sort of maximize or if we're bumping up to a limit in the industrial area, what are the strategies to either provide more opportunity in the industrial area, like brownfield remediation to help unlock more land, or what are the programs and support that are needed to realize more opportunity in the other sectors, in the office sector, in the healthcare sector, where we do have room to grow in Portland. And that's sort of the balance that is the outcome, is the combination of sort of land for employment growth, land for resource protection, and what then are the other programs and policies and investments needed to support a shared economic prosperity. Because this is part of the challenge that we in Portland bump up against, is the way Goal 9 is structured, is it's for everybody else outside of the metro region. Like in Salem, when they bump up against this, they just said, well, we're going to go expand the UGB to the west and add a bunch of land. Well, we can't do that in Portland. And some of it gets bounced to the region. Like, if we're not going to be able to provide that opportunity in the region, where else is it going to go? And is that an acceptable impact? But from you all, and one of the things, like if you look at the section 4 of the old EOA, the community choices section, there's some land tables, which we'll show you here today. And then there's a series of strategies and actions that say, hey, you know what, to realize this economic vision and this growth, we're going to need city to do these things. And they're broken out by industrial area and the central city and our healthcare campus institutions and our neighborhood districts. So, that's where the sort of, it's not that is the added, and that's the crossover with the Advanced Portland strategy and other strategy is it's not just about the zoning map. There are other things need to happen to realize all of this economic growth. Is that making sense?
I think it does, but, go ahead.
Well, I mean, and I've said this many times, but, and I, in the last year since COVID, dove into the history of the area of the Lower Willamette and interviewed hundreds of people about how past economic policies have impacted the region. And, the Superfund, and I just always want to make sure that we always acknowledge that there is a CI hub, there is a Superfund, and that the people of North Portland have lost hundreds of businesses and thousands of homes. And so there is this balance of what the impact has been of our past policies and what the future is and what people without a college degree, want from that area. And I've just interviewed so many people that I'm not sure that losing the ability to fish or the ability to have access to the river was really what they had in mind in terms of economic prosperity. I mean, I think that they once had both fishing and jobs. And so I think that and people are afraid. We can never minimize the fact that people are afraid of Cascadia up there. And I'm not saying it's not going to impact the economic well-being of the whole city, but that place that we're talking about, they live in the shadow of those tanks, and and they read the county report, and they're afraid. So to them, that's not economic opportunity. They feel like they're not being listened to. And so, I'm here to say they want to be able to fish, they want access to their river, and they don't want to be in a dangerous, they want an economy that's not dangerous to them, because that doesn't feel like economic opportunity. That feels like an economic disaster to them. And I think people who don't live there and talk to people every day don't know how that feels, and I unfortunately dove into interviewing hundreds of people about it, so I know how it feels, and it doesn't feel good. So,
Rose? Oh, Corky and then Rose.
Just because she was talking about Superfund, something that I just wanted to bring up because so Yakima Nation works on Portland Harbor Superfund. We were instrumental in the 90s getting the site listed. And when we came to the record of decision, EPA did a lot of work on sort of public awareness. And I think what the public heard from EPA was it's going to take 30 years. And it took a long time to sort of get our arms around the 30-year cleanup. But I think, because I know I thought record of decision, 2017, 30 years, that means in 2047, the river would be cleaned up and safer, not completely safe, but safer. I think it's important for us to understand that's not what EPA was talking about, or at least it's coming clear that's not the way it's unfolding. Once we get to active remediation will be about 15 years. We're still a few years away from that. So we're looking at active remediation ending sometime in 2045. And then they're expecting the river to be safe 30 years from that. So we're out to 2070, 75, which is inappropriate, and we should work on that. But I think that has a direct impact to the economic side of companies feeling comfortable with taking on land and any potential sort of activities there. You talk a lot about brownfields, but these outside factors have a lot of impact on what's gonna happen in terms of the business community and industrial community being able to come in on an existing Superfund site.
Yes, and then we'll get into it over the next couple of meetings on how big a barrier or opportunity that is.
And I love that, by the way, too. I remember way back being in a meeting at the EPA Portland office where people were saying, oh, and we're about to have the record of decision, then we can start cleaning up. And all the EPA officials were going, oh, well, no, that's not exactly how it works. You know, yeah, we have to think very far ahead. My question here, and Benton makes me think of this, he touched on something that kind of, you know, it's like, that's been bothering me, is I love balance. I mean, I like in what you're saying about how we balance these different competing needs is extremely important. I also spent my entire life believing in business paying for our environmental improvements, you know, because if you don't do that, then how are you going to pay for it? I mean, then you end up just, you go downhill. That's why I've worked on dam removal campaigns or worked on wilderness campaigns, and we've been fairly successful on those because we approach them from this idea of, well, you need to have a good economic, you have to have a good way to pay for what you're trying to do. So I very much believe in that. But when it comes to this process, I'm just confused. So please try and help me out here. We talk about balancing, let's say goal 9 versus goal 5. I know it's more complicated than that, but to simplify talking about balancing these two different things. And it seems to me that you can't balance one goal with the other unless you balance the other goal with the one. So we have this process where, and you said a little while ago, that the EOA is to comply with goal 9. As far as I know, do we have a similar process where we bring in economic needs into what we do to comply with goal 5? I'm not aware of that. Not that I want more process, I really don't, you know, but these are the questions that come up. How does this work? Because it seems like I'm concerned that maybe we're balancing these things at the wrong point in time. So help me out with that, please.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert in goal 5, but and when in meeting 3, when we start on that, we'll try and bring forward some of that. But when you set up a protection framework, so the first thing they do, just at a high level, is they go through and they look at the resources that are out there and basically rank the resources depending on what's out there as a high, medium, or low resource. And then there are the sort of, there is a economic, social, energy, environment analysis, ESEE, that was done that considers the amount of protection and basically that scheme has said, you know what, we're going to protect the high value resources, and we're in certain situations we're going to protect some of the medium and probably not as much as the low. And that's where sort of what you will see in sort of different protection scenarios are sort of lined up along those lines.
And that's the goal 5 compliance that you're
Yes.
describing there. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I just
Yeah.
maybe jump in with something that may be helpful or may not be helpful, but I think that's actually, we have designed this process to do exactly what you said, which is to balance them against each other together. So this is why we are having the conversation about resource protection at the same time that we're talking about the EOA, and we're having these, you know, these processes essentially conjoined for the time, because as Tom said, as we look at the industrial land and the natural resources, all are the confluence are these waterways, right? And that's where the the natural resources are as well. And so we're trying to make sure that we know enough about the natural resources and what level of protection is appropriate. And that's why the environmental zone for this area are being done in accordance with this process, is so that we can say, okay, if we have all these natural resources, what scenarios is high, medium, and low? What does that mean when we say, okay, if we go with the medium, for example, how much natural resources are we protecting and how much industrial land is maybe not going to be able to be as much, use for industrial land in the future if we protect that level of natural resource, right? So we're trying to do these things so they inform each other. That way we know what land we have remaining for industrial use and for all the various job uses.
But when you develop that compliance plan for Goal 5, did you have an economic element in that plan? Just like right now, you're developing a compliance plan for Goal 9, and we're bringing in an environmental element to it, which I think is good, but
And I think that
I'm
analysis.
not seeing it.
Yeah.
It seems to me a disconnect. Still don't
I mean, I can answer that because I've lived Goal 5 for the last 30 years and I drove that at the city over and over again. Yeah, I mean, the entire process is ESE analysis, which is basically these are the high value and the medium value resources out there. Now, how do we lower the protections in order to make sure we meet our economic goals and our energy goals and our social goals? And it's a balancing goal. The whole goal is set up to balance, and that's why we wind up with limited protections. So it is there, and I think some ways the land use planning system balkanizes these things. They put Goal 5 over here, and you kind of do this. Yes. What I was trying to do with my comment, actually, which I think triggered this whole conversation, was I was trying to bring this to the ground, because I think we get caught up in this theoretical land use planning universe of ESE analysis and all these other things. And I think what I was trying to get at is I think it would be beneficial the more we can get concrete goals on the table, rather than talking about high and medium and all these other things. I don't think these landscapes are as complex as the land use system makes them out to be. And so I think if we start to get to a place relatively quickly of saying, we want X thousand jobs over the next 30 years, we want 5 access points to the river, we want 50-foot setbacks, we want floodplains protected, we want shallow water habitat, we want restoration sites every quarter mile, something like that, that starts to actually physically describe what we're actually trying to do in a way that people would actually understand it, including the public. I think we'd be much better off, and then see what is physically possible on this limited geography.
Did that north, what is it called?
North Reach.
North Reach plan, didn't the North Reach plan sort of do some of that work?
It did, and it got close, but then it got appealed to LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals, and that was sent back because we didn't have a current EOA that really assessed the economic impact of that plan.
Understand that, but could we use the information out of that North Reach plan to sort of do what Bob is talking about?
I think we are, and in the sense that we're also, I mean, this process, we're going to be looking at together that are going to show where the mapped resources are and how that overlaps with the industrial areas and at the different categories of high, medium, and low. So
we can look at that. We'll look at the new FEMA BIOP floodplain regulations and what we think it means for the North Reach, and then we have much more up-to-date mapping information along the slough. And that's where we'll start, because we have more accurate information. Yeah, John and then Ellen.
Yeah, so just a couple things. First, I just want to say, like, this is my first time through this process, but at a conceptual level, Bob, what you're saying appeals to me. Like, let's get the concrete stuff out there and make it concrete, and then instead of holding it back here, let's put it out there and see if we can't bounce all of it. That's generally, I think, a good way to work. I just wanted to say that. And of course, I haven't been through this, so I have to understand how it's going to work going forward. I just wanted to say or ask is back to your slide with SEDS and the Advanced Portland Plan. Will we have an opportunity for those plans to be presented here? And in particular, I'm interested in Advanced Portland because we were deeply involved with that. And I think it does an amazing job of balancing what we're talking about right here within its plan. And it lays it out there where the sectors that were picked for, that were chosen to be the core sectors that Prosper is going to focus on developing in the future were specifically to balance economic growth, economic equity in terms of jobs that are available to people without college degrees, but also our climate goals. I mean, that was a philosophy of the whole thing. So, and obviously this has to line up with that plan. So I think it would be good if we got a presentation, even if someone from Prosper was a part of this process, so that could be an ongoing input throughout. I agree. The same thing with the sets. I feel less a commitment to that. I just think the Advanced Portland plan's really, really good, and they did a really good job of balancing the values we're talking about here. And that includes, by the way, like natural resources. When we talk about the athletic and apparel industry, that's one of the core sectors there. We've noted in our work for that sector to thrive, the reason it's a sector we focus on is we take advantage of our natural assets. We see them as we market the products. That's how we attract people here. So anyway, I just wanted to say that early.
Okay. We'll
I think
look
that would be good.
for a way to elevate that.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I also want to agree with Bob. I think having concrete goals, and I actually said it 2 years ago, let's get on the table what people really want to have happen and work from there. And then we probably would have greater success with this whole planning process. So thanks, Bob, for bringing that up. But I also want to agree around the timeline and of an EOA being a 5-year plan. You say 5 to 7, but I always thought it was 5. And perhaps we're trying to do too much in it. And we're trying to do things because the EOA was the reason that the North Reach got set back. I think there's a sense of wanting to get ahead of it this time in order to pursue the North Reach without the same bumps that happened before, which is fine. But I also think that if we're trying to make the EOA be basically, I feel like what's happening is you're doing the comp plan in the EOA. That by trying to do, this is, what is the original intent of this EOA and why has it grown into such a big deal? I know you've tried to answer that, but it's still something I haven't gotten my head around.
I think that as we go through this, we with your input and with the ideas that we have about what information to bring to this group to help guide that conversation, I think it will become more clear. I mean, there will be maps, and I'm even thinking we could print maps and put them up around the wall and start looking very concretely at where these overlaps are and what does it mean to advancing the two different goals. I do think that we can, it will become clear, and we have some ideas about what to bring to the table to facilitate the conversation. If you have ideas about what to bring to the table to facilitate the conversation, like the point about the Advanced Portland plan, or let's get that all out so that we can do that, because I think we genuinely want to put all of the goals on the table, right? And the concrete to everyone, what everyone's saying, like concrete things that we want to accomplish, and not have it be a theoretical conversation as much as possible.
The one last point I do want to make is, and then there's an add-on. I want us to look at this through a lens that it's not one versus another. And that is so significant for us to be successful. You get after both. And somehow the way it's discussed, it's coming across to me like one loses, when you bring up win-win, but one's losing if the other one is winning. And maybe that's not how it's meant, but that I want us to go forward like we're all going to get what's needed. And when I say get what's needed from my perspective is I'm very passionate about protecting the jobs that are low barrier to entry middle income jobs that are very focused in the industrial area. So, but that doesn't mean we can't meet environmental goals in doing that. So, and then the little add-on, and you can answer this later for me, but the FEMA buyout regs, I thought those were for individual landholders to address, to be able to take out insurance should they choose to do so. And not necessarily to be used in a way that's justifying environmental zoning.
I
don't know.
speak to that a little bit, and I think we'll have meetings dedicated to that topic, but the city has a program essentially to have floodplain regulations such that we as a city overall, all property owners in the city can have access to reduced flood insurance from the National Flood Insurance Program. So it's not the reason that individual property owners benefit from that reduction in the floodplain insurance is because the city does certain things to regulate development in the floodplain and to ensure that we minimize flood risk. And that's why people have that. If the city didn't do those things, people's flood insurance would be more expensive, or would potentially, we wouldn't be eligible. Property owners in the city would not even be eligible at all for flood insurance from the national program. So that's why it's important. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Any questions or comments from the folks online? If not, we can move on to the next section.
I have one more question,
Yeah.
because we're talking about maps and sort of what's needed. And I'm hearing that for the sort of natural resource side. Do we have that understanding on the other side? So, okay.
Yeah.
Like the infrastructure and land need, okay.
Yeah.
So we'll have a, good.
We'll get into that, start to get into that at the next meeting.
Okay, great.
That is all what goes into what we call the buildable land inventory.
Do you like maps?
I will.
Okay. I love maps.
I like maps.
All right, we're gonna get here briefly a little bit into what is the EOA, a little deeper, and then I'm gonna turn things over here to Steve to talk through where we're starting from an economic standpoint. But you know, the EOA is what we call a background report, or a foundation document to the comprehensive plan. It is sort of that what is otherwise referred to as a factual basis. So when you see in the policies about, you know, certain referring to the city's economy and whatever, that's the document we turn to. It's adopted by council. Council said, this is the economy. This is what's going on. This is what we expect to happen in the future. And so it is part of that factual basis in the comp plan, and hence it gets adopted. It is a land use decision. It gets adopted by council. It is appealable to LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals. And that's where and why, when we do all this, we have to factor in and sort of work within all of this land use planning framework that is Oregon. As we talked a little bit before, it is part of statewide planning goal 9. There are basically 4 elements to it. You know, it has to be grounded in recent trends, and Steve's going to talk about what that is. We sent out a link to a report where we documented a lot of those trends. It is a supply and demand analysis. Employment forecast creates the demand for land, for building space. We inventory all of the land, vacant and redevelopable land we think is out in Portland. We look at constraints such as brownfields, such as natural resources, steep slopes, floodplains, to really get at, what is our supply, what is our demand, and then we go through this reconciliation process. How much of a surplus do we have? Where do we have shortfalls? What can we do about the shortfalls? The state says we got to have a surplus. So, what are the strategies or infrastructure investments that we can do to create more capacity? And that's really what goes into that fourth element, which I was talking about, that those policy choices or those strategies that can provide that 20-year capacity. And that's where we bring in goal 5 because it impacts that capacity. And that's why we're trying to do both this process and to understand both and not do one and then do the other, or do one and then not have to go back and forth. We're trying to do both at the same time. I'm going to turn things over to Steve and start with an overview of where we're at and where we wind up ultimately through this process. So Steve, why don't you talk a bit?
Still, before going into trends, in what is an EOA, both Goal 9 and the EOA apply a land use lens to the economy and to job growth. So we, in our analysis, tried to do the same thing and look at job growth by sector type in land use sector type, shown in this pie chart, that correlate to portions, different types of business districts across the city, shown in the map here. Basically, 4 types of business districts that each specialize in different types of businesses and jobs. So the office sectors tend to locate in, that are blue here, tend to locate in the central city. Manufacturing and distribution in the industrial area, shown in gray. Retail and services tend to be in the neighborhood commercial area, shown in red. And you can't see it as well, but healthcare and education are particularly in 15 large college campuses and hospitals. Each of those sector types adds up to about 1/4 of the economy. So Goal 9 is right, that the growing economy has diverse land needs, and it tries to apply that type of analysis to growth capacity. Go on, Tom. And then one other context setting slide. This is a summary chart from the previous, the 2016 EOA. It shows supply and demand analysis of the decisions that went into the comp plan. The 4 lines on that are the 4 geographies that I just mentioned. The first couple of columns are looking at demand, and then it compares it with supply. And really the takeaway here is in that last column is that our starting point for this project is we have about a 40 to 50 year supply of commercial land in the central city and in the neighborhood commercial areas for growth. We have a relatively tight, industrial land supply that barely meets 20-year demand. And that's what we'll be working on through this project. And we'll bring back an update to this table at our next meeting. Project goals. So we took the project goals to the Planning and Sustainability Commission last year when presenting the trends analysis. They still seem to make sense. The first goal is to do an EOA to analyze and provide adequate 2045 land supply for businesses and jobs, essentially updating the EOA from 2035 to 2045. The second is to promote inclusive prosperity and reduce BIPOC income disparities. John talked about those other plans. Recent plans have very much more focused on inclusive prosperity and upward mobility. That's been an area of the growing economy where we haven't done as well. And then the third goal is about essentially balancing what we've been talking about in the over the course of the meeting, how to analyze industrial growth capacity to optimize multiple objectives. Those are the 3 goals that we're going forward with.
And I think it's that tight industrial land supply combined with where most of our natural resources are is why we keep coming back to talking about the industrial areas. And because we have so much more capacity in the other areas, those policy questions aren't as locked or don't have as much conflict in them as they do in the industrial. So the conversation always keeps spinning back to what's going on in the industrial areas. Corky, you had...
Going back to the previous slide, would it be appropriate, I think it would be very helpful for me to add in our residential needs, our housing needs on this as well, because we see conflicts between, well, we need more housing, maybe we'll move them into office, towers, that sort of thing. And so that, I think that might be helpful. It'd be helpful for me. Is that reasonable or appropriate here?
We can, a little bit, I think, on 2 factors. One, we can explain how we've factored that in, especially in our commercial mixed use districts. Like we're already sort of taking out the residential capacity to account for that housing need. I think where it comes up later is the question about conversion of more industrial land.
Right, yeah, but and that's why I'm saying it would be helpful to see right here. We see that we have adequate capacity in Central City. We have adequate capacity in neighborhood commercial. Do we have adequate capacity for housing?
We have, similar to commercial, we have about 2 times what we need in terms of
that analysis is in the housing needs analysis, but the land base, the BLI is the basis for both of them, right?
Yeah.
So the BLI, so in the exercise of calculating capacity in the buildable lands inventory, the areas in, say for example, in Central City, the assumptions about job capacity in the Central City is already factored out where we've assumed that there's also residential capacity, right? Isn't that right, Tom?
Yeah.
So that if you think of it, those lands are, there's a portion ascribed to residential uses and a portion ascribed to jobs uses. And these numbers already reflect that.
So it wouldn't be appropriate to have that.
No, but we
share the
can
assumptions.
provide the executive summary and links to the housing needs analysis so you can see how that works.
I think that's important because, transportation and planning are doing a plan about extending the streetcar into the industrial area. And knowing that, having the information there that says that we have adequate zoned lands already for housing, I think is really important when it comes to that discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one other point.
We don't talk about these numbers. I don't talk about these numbers without also talking about housing. So
yeah, absolutely. The industrial category doesn't allow housing, right? Unless we change it.
That's what we're getting at.
Right.
Yeah, this is all about rezoning, right?
Yeah.
Well, this
isn't, but
this isn't about rezoning. This is about the land as it is designated and zoned today. What is the capacity for either jobs or housing on that land? So in general, right, these numbers, and I think Tom or Steve said at the next meeting, we'll be giving you an updated table that's reflective of the assumptions of today and the land use designations and zoning of today. And industrial, whatever acreage is in the industrial category doesn't allow residential. And so there would be no assumptions about residential there. Now, you're talking about Montgomery Park area, right? And so I think we will note whether those acres are already removed essentially from that industrial category or not. I mean, just in recognition of the fact that we know there's a process that is ongoing right now that's considering that, right? So to me, it seems, and I'm interested to know what you think, but to me, it seems like we should, for purposes of having numbers that are reflective of, that are more conservative, frankly, right? We would probably take those acres out of the industrial category for now, because we are undergoing a process to change them. If that doesn't go through for whatever reason and that changes, then those acres could go back into the industrial category. So I think that's just a way to be really kind of upfront and transparent about what really is available in that category.
I think that one would appreciate that.
Yeah.
And that it would be very important. And I think in particular, it's for us to remember that we have to recognize what's inside of this room, right? And so while we know that there's an excess of housing, buildable land for housing, that is not the general understanding, I think, of most people who are involved in the political. And understandably so, because we're not building it fast enough, right?
Right.
So recognizing that there are more pressures on industrial land than just we might talk about in this group is important. Like if it's 107% in the previous EOA, but to your point, we should remove whatever is potentially up for debate on the way to Montgomery Park. Place that might bring that number down below 100, right? We should know that while we're putting on the table whatever the environment. You know actually all of the various inputs to this conversation.
Yeah.
That's important. That's important.
Definitely.
I just want to say, I would encourage people to drive down Front Avenue in Northwest and look at the vacant land. Just take a drive, take a bike ride, and almost the entire, like huge swaths of for sale or lease land, and also on Old St. Helens Highway. I mean, I drive there, so I see there's so much industrial land for sale and lease. So I
think it's important to note on that land that is along Front Avenue that there's an overlay that whomever uses that land must also use the Willamette River. So a lot of industrial users can't actually occupy the land on Front Avenue that is on the riverside. So just to note there.
Thank you.
But we've also heard for a long time that you need river industrial land, and I think that's something that really does need to be explored in this process, because that's been the main driver, was river dependent and uses that if we had the land, people would come and industry would come. And I think we're in a different place now than we were 10 years ago in terms of what we're seeing at Terminal 2 and Terminal 6 and so on. And so it's an interesting shift to be saying, I'm hearing this more and more, that we need industrial land, but we may not need river-dependent industrial land, that industrial land should be converted. We're certainly seeing that at Terminal 2 right now. So it's a pretty major shift that we're experiencing right now.
I think some of that, especially on the river, is tied up in the Superfund and the liability that comes with touching that land and getting further on the resolution of the Superfund, helps resolve some of those liability issues that we're hoping would make that land more attractive for investment. Because we haven't seen a lot of development along the river.
Bob, I think it's a really important point. I mean, obviously, as a river-dependent company, maintain as much of that river-dependent land potentially for our own growth that we might need for future development is important. But to me, that also brings back the regional part of this conversation, which is great. If we want to redevelop or rezone or remove the overlay, right now, it's not our understanding that there's another place to replace that somewhere else, right? And so that would be part of this buildable lands inventory question, of whether it's actually possible to go find it in another place to achieve whatever goal we're trying to achieve. I don't know the answer to that question, so I'm hoping that potential is there.
I think it's similar to the brownfield conversation. We're not. Let's address that. I don't know if this is the right place for that, but the comp plan. I remember. I think it was Eric testifying also where they said, "Wait, 60% redevelopment of brownfields. Can we do that?" And he kind of went, So I think it's a similar thing. Yeah, are we seeing industrial development on that riverfront industrial land, not to the degree we want. So what's the problem? And then just, if that means we don't need so much, so be it, fine. But I think the question there is why isn't that happening? Same thing with brownfield redevelopment. Why isn't it happening? What can we do to change that?
A whole list, Courtney. For instance, why that's not happening.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Well, I mean, I just think this is, again, sort of what happens outside this room, right? We cannot have a conversation about why someone is not buying, leasing, or developing industrial land without acknowledging how difficult it is to do that important, right? Zero, right? And some of that are real and understandable, hard-fought wins, right? For environmental protection or employee protection, whatever it might be. But when you're talking about an empty lot on the Willamette River, if you're a company that's trying to come in and start a business, it's like the cost hurdle for that is enormous, right? So, which is not to say we should be getting rid of that land, but it's just a recognition that if we're going to achieve things like Urban Advanced Portland Plan, there's going to have to be a reckoning of how difficult it is to develop that land, right? You basically have to, and this just happened, right? You basically have to buy an existing company that's already developed that you can go in right now and your employees are already in place. It happened, right, with Gunderson, right? That worked, right? But going and starting something new, really difficult.
Which is important because if you wanted to convert, just hypothetically, you want to convert that riverfront property to residential and put in a nice park, well, I think the redevelopment is going to be just as difficult. So it doesn't matter what it's zoned, you've got a redevelopment problem. Yeah.
Is that primarily a contamination issue in your mind, or is that
no? I mean, if it were bigger, which is the existing, I mean, yes, there's a land contamination and a Superfund hurdle, but I mean, like sometimes it could take you a year to get a permit to put racking in the middle of your facility, right? Like, some of it is just that process, which understand, like there's work happening to fix that, but you don't have years to make that happen, right? I would say weirdly, if you're starting something new right now, your biggest hurdle will be employees. Is just workforce, like getting enough people to go take new jobs, which is, again, Gunderson had 300 people who were ready to just stay there and keep working, right? So there's a lot of hurdles. Some of them are environmental policies, some of them are permitting policies, some of them are just pure economics, some of them are workforce. There's a lot that are in front of you.
So Cassie asks in the chat, how has the city engaged tribes in riverfront land investment conversations? And I'm not really sure. We can find out. I know the city have been working with them on a tribal center as part of the OMSI redevelopment. Rose, I don't know how the tribal city discussions have gone on around the Superfund cleanup. I would expect that they've been happening, but.
Yeah, and well, it depends. It's more site specific related to how we engage with the city in terms of, so for example, Willamette Cove, very engaged with the city in sort of the planning process and them taking their comments and taking them to heart. So on specific areas, but overall, I think that's a little different. I think we're just part of the overall sort of like for Superfund, part of the Superfund process. Yeah. I don't know how to answer that question. Okay. I really don't.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
There's so many just different elements to that, but I did sort of want to get back to the difficulty of doing anything along the riverfront industrial wise. I think something that the city and the community should be aware of, and in my estimation, outraged by, is EPA is basically, EPA's done a lot of good things, but basically when we're looking at Portland Harbor Superfund, we're looking at almost 100 years it was listed in 2000. By the time we get to the end of the process, it's not even the end of the process, but when they would consider the river, meeting cleanup goals, is almost like 80 years. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And that's not how we should be doing cleanup. And I think if there was a change in the way that was moving forward, and I know there's a lot of complexities, but there's also not a lot of pressure to change the process. We're all just in the process. Meanwhile, we're trying to work around that. And that there needs to be more fire put under that to speed that up because anyway, getting to cleanup goals in almost 100 years is not acceptable.
I really agree. We may be getting way off topic
Yes.
for you. You may be going, oh my God,
Yes.
but
It's your time.
what Benton was just describing in terms of industrial development, I suspect is very similar to why Willamette Cove has still not been cleaned up. We're trying to put in a park. We're trying to clean. I mean, because I live right near it, so. But I don't know for certain, but I bet it's the same basic obstacles, and that needs to change if we're going to move forward on any of this.
Yeah. I think we'll move us along.
Deb had hand up.
Maybe.
I had only raised my hand just to make sure you saw Cassie's question in the chat. Thank you.
Got it.
Thanks, Deb.
So why don't we move along here? And yes, Cassie, we'll follow up and try and get more information about how the city is engaging with tribes on the waterfront. So I think Steve's gonna talk a little bit about sort of the trends that we saw in what we call the last business cycle. So think about between the Great Recession through the pandemic, and then talk a little bit about how we're recovering coming out of the pandemic.
So I have about a half hour worth of slides and we have about 15 or so minutes left. So I will rush.
I think we're scheduled till 12:30
Are we?
for this meeting.
Okay, so the EOA process requires a forecast that is based largely on trends, growth trends and market trends. And we prepared a market trends report and published it last year. Much of this is a summary of that. And then I've also updated pandemic-related trends that I'll add an appendix to that fairly soon, and I will include some of that. Basic takeaways from trends: Portland and the region have experienced robust economic growth much faster than the nation. Growth has been unequal, contributing to income inequality. About a little more than half has been high-wage jobs, a little more than a third has been low-wage jobs, and middle-wage jobs have been relatively flat. BIPOC workers have higher incomes in the industrial. To address industrial or BIPOC income disparities, industrial and office jobs tend to have significantly higher incomes for BIPOC workers. But most of the job growth has been in Portland has been in other sectors that have the opposite effect. Most middle wage jobs that don't require bachelor's degrees are in the industrial sectors. And industrial land supply is tight and getting tighter. Goal 9 requires that an EOA look at trends in context, national context, regional context, and local trends. This slide shows trends by growth rate in the last 3 business cycles, comparing the nation, the region, and the county and the city. The main takeaway from this slide is that the region, those orange bars, are growing about 50 to 60% faster than the nation in each of the last 3 business cycles. We have a strong growth rate. And then the second is that city job growth, the second takeaway is that city job growth is accelerating. We didn't really have good job data before 2002, but in the last trend we have, we've grown about 71,000 jobs in the last business cycle within the city and grew slightly faster than the region and slightly faster than we projected in the current EOA.
Steve, can I ask a question about this? Obviously, this happened, all that data is before 2020. When you think about it, not even what has happened from a jobs and population standpoint since then, but how do you factor in remote work? Like if that person no longer works in Portland, even if they're in the region, how would you adjust the data to reflect that?
Can we hold, that's a huge rabbit hole.
And especially
Can we
for the
hold that
next-
to the next meeting
next
when we talk
meeting,
about the
we'll go into
buildable
that
land inventory?
For
'Cause-
office.
Okay.
Yeah.
Office. Yeah. The next slide. The job growth trends are also diverse. They're growing in each of those 4 land use sectors that I showed in the previous pie chart. The last business cycle, the growth rate has been generally 1% to 2% in each of those. The other big takeaway from this is this shows pandemic trends. So the job losses by sector type have been substantially different between the Great Recession and the COVID-19 recession. COVID-19 recessions were primarily, those job losses were mainly in retail and commercial services. And in the institutional sectors, healthcare and education, we haven't quite recovered those job losses. The previous, the Great Recession business or job losses were much more in the industrial and the office sectors. And in the current recession, we have totally recovered those job losses in the industrial and the office sectors, both in the region and in Multnomah County. So different job growth rates within these 2 recessions. Go to the next slide. Also, when we look at job growth rates by sector, it's a little bit different than looking at job growth rates by business district. And this slide tries to explain how they are interrelated. So if you look at the first 3 bars on the left, those show office sector job growth in the last business cycle, last 20 years or so. Most of those jobs are already in the central city in blue, and they're mainly growing in the central city in blue, but they're also growing in the other areas. So office jobs are concentrated in the central city. The next 3 bars are about industrial sector jobs, and they are mainly in the industrial districts in the gray areas of the map, and they are only growing in the gray areas. They're declining in other areas of the city. The other 2 land use types are more balanced, but healthcare and education are particularly concentrated in campus institutions area, shown in purple, and the retail and consumer services are particularly concentrated in the neighborhood commercial areas. Business districts are specialized, but they also have some diversity within. Go to the next slide. Also, growth trends are different if we look at job growth versus looking at land development. This takes a land development view, and it's looking at CoStar data of new occupied building space in the region within the last business cycle. The main takeaway from this, if you look at that rest of the region slide or columns, they are similar to the overall region. So most of the land development in the region has been for multifamily housing and been for industrial development. You look at the geographies within the city. In the commercial areas in the central city and rest of the city is mainly the neighborhood commercial areas. Most of the development that's occurred in those areas has been multifamily residential. For the central city, all of the net development in the central city has been multifamily residential, and we've lost employment land space. And a second point on this is that growing through redevelopment meets employment land demand unevenly. In Portland, regional employment growth was faster and particularly in the industrial areas. Portland grew about 7 million square feet of industrial development in the last business cycle in the industrial areas. But we also lost 2 million square feet in the central city in the commercial areas, primarily to redevelopment for higher density uses, mostly residential uses. So if we look citywide at the trend, we're not growing industrial land as much in the industrial districts because we're losing it in the commercial. And Central City. Pearl District still and Central East Side, yes, both.
Yeah, I guess two things. I mean, I agree with Ellen, what Ellen said earlier about not pitting these things against each other. But I think one of the things that you just said that really jumps out at me is that the challenge has not been so much industrial land versus environment. It's been industrial land versus conversion to housing. And I know, and you know this too. I mean, I feel like I'm the only one that shows up and opposes conversion in the Central Industrial District and the OMSI District. When that happens, it's ironic that, you know, Audubon was one that would show up.
By the way.
Yeah, well, but more to the point, I guess I'm trying to tease out, so you said we had a kind of a net increase of 7 million in the loss of 2 million square feet. Do you have any sense of what that additional square footage converted to in terms of actual jobs though? I mean, because that's a physical, and I was trying to tease it out of the two approaches you took, but I guess my question is, are we getting jobs out of that? You know, are we getting a warehouse with 2 guys and a dog growing pot, or are we getting, you know, a whole bunch of good jobs?
We'll talk about that a lot next month or at our next meeting when we talk about the forecast. And yeah, those those space losses there also have industrial sector job losses in the central city and the commercial areas too that go along with that. So they're actually losing those industrial jobs. Yeah, there's job growth that goes with it in the industrial areas. And I'll talk about that.
Can I just ask a question about that, Steve? Some of what's being reflected in these numbers is the fact that those lands were rezoned sometime in the past from more job producing. Yeah, there was a policy. That's one thing I want to make sure to point out to everyone here. You're saying we lost this much square footage or whatever, but that was a decision that happened through a process, and a decision was made to convert land from either just regular commercial or something that was a little bit more of an industrial category, right?
Yes.
And keeping in mind that we do have, what was the number, 206, or I forget what the amount of percent of office space, right? We have, so we have, there is
surplus capacity.
You know, I think just in putting it in context of the housing crisis and the conversations we're having just on the other side of this ledger, if you think about, right, residential, is the understanding that we have a lot of land for office, for example, and general commercial. And it's important to think about how residential can be a part of that mix. And those designations in those zones do allow a mix of the two. So just want to make sure that that's kept in context with these numbers in that conversation. Yeah.
30-year-old decisions. In the 1989 Central City Plan is when the rezoning of the Pearl District and South Waterfront was done. That's when the decisions were made. And the Metro's Regional Growth Management Plan was done before that designates this as the regional center for density within the region. And so they were rezoned then. The redevelopment is occurring now, and we're losing those jobs.
But that was also partly very intentional to drive office and commercial jobs, right? I mean, that was part of the plan was urban village type location. And part of your data is showing that from an equity standpoint, that has not necessarily worked.
I think what the data is showing is that the vision about the uses that would occur is occurring.
That part's happening, but the jobs might not be as good.
Well, that's the challenge of linking type of job and job quality with land, right? It's not a direct correlation. I mean, I think even Steve is saying, you largely get middle wage jobs in industrial land, but that, there's not a direct correlation between what type of land you're talking about and job. There could be diversity within the different types of land.
We're averaging out, yeah.
Yeah.
And we have to be careful. I have to always be careful when I say, look, industrial jobs are family wage, for large percentages of BIPOC, large percentage of LGBTQ. That's all true. That doesn't mean that every industrial job is fantastic. No, of course, but we have to look at the averages. And there is, I think, a pretty direct link there between kind of what's the typical job on that industrial parcel versus the typical job in the office.
Well, I want to capture one thing here because I think it's pivotal to the environmental concerns that will come up throughout this process. And Steve has heard this a million times. This is Tom, which is we continually upzone in jobs lands, industrial lands, especially in the central city, the central east side, the OMSI district, for housing for white collar jobs. The housing we're getting is not affordable. So we're upzoning, people are making a small fortune, and then we're pricing people out of the market. So we're losing on that end. We're losing on the environmental end because as we upzone, we create the deficit in industrial lands, which then require that we're not able to protect trees or we're not able to protect floodplains. And so, I think that's the whole paradigm in my mind that is driving the conflict that we've had. That we have to get our heads around.
Describe the vicious circle really well.
Well, that's why I show up to testify against OMSI, much to my detriment, and say you shouldn't be converting jobs lands to housing unless we have a plan that's holistic that recognizes that if you do this here, it's going to come out of the other side. And so it's just really working out. But anyways, that's not editorializing. But I think that to me is the central problem from the environmental perspective.
Well said. I would love to see a graph of the riverfront land, how much there is total, and then how much is vacant. That would be a helpful graph as we kind of look at this area. And then another graph a brownfield graph would be helpful so that we see, exactly what we're looking at in terms of brownfields. I toured a brownfield and they basically, DQ said you can't build here. Like they just said you cannot, it's not safe, McCormick and Baxter, except for the top 5 acres. Anyway, that's what they said on the tour. And then what's storage and warehouse? That's what we asked for earlier is like what percentage of this land is like now Amazon warehouses, which you're counting as industrial, right? Is an Amazon warehouse industrial?
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's a huge employer right now, but it's not. So the only reason I say that is because I think it's confusing to the public. Like they have an image of industrial that is not exactly what you're talking about. Like if you're talking about Amazon warehouses, they're employing, I'm assuming, a lot of people, but that's not people's image of what new industrial is. And not, I don't think that people think like that. The people I know don't think that Amazon they would call that a warehouse. They wouldn't call it. So I just think as you reach out to people to say, this is how many acres we now have of Amazon even, or something like that. I just think as we move out into the community, we're going to have to be more illustrative of what we're talking about. This much riverfront land, this much is now warehouses for whether it's distribution or whatever you want to call it. But I just don't think that, and I've said this before, I just don't think that we're illustrating, if you're a writing teacher, you would say more detail. This is not enough detail to paint a picture that the public can understand. And then if we have this many acres in Amazon warehouses, what's the wage for someone who's working in an Amazon warehouse? Is that the kind of income that we're talking about? So does this make any sense?
Be careful what you ask for. You can vary data like that, but yes, we have some of that, and some of it is.
Isn't that?
Yeah.
I got equity slides coming up here next.
But before you move on, I just want to say at a later date, I'd like to know what people think industrial jobs are. And you don't have to answer it now because we're
No.
taking away, but
Yeah.
I love the perception of what industrial jobs are from the community. And that would be really, I think, helpful to me.
Nice photo, Steve. It's great.
So there's a couple more slides before I get at equity, but I'll have a few slides on equity that try to answer some of those questions. On marine industrial land, we look at that differently. Eco Northwest prepared a report similar to what we did in the previous EOA. The main takeaway from that is that they found substantial market demand for marine industrial development. They estimated it at about 350 to 400 acres over to 2040. About 2/3 of that was for marine production and marine services, which are manufacturers, barge companies, those types of companies that need a dock. The other third was for marine terminals, like what the Port of Portland does. So it's fairly diverse, the marine industrial demand out there. On the other, and the second takeaway on this is, however, the demand is influenced by policy factors, and Portland Harbor area is very growth constrained, land constrained for new development. So it depends upon proactive policy direction to address the constraints on development that Benton talked about, that Rose talked about. So Superfund progress is number one on the list, is to buy one of those brownfields on Front Avenue. Most of the 300 to 400 acres of brownfields are in the harbor access land. Most of them are on Front Avenue, and new owners going into those have liability for Superfund, and it creates a very difficult issue over the long term. Also issues of industrial land conversion, as Bob talked about, and concerns about industrial land retention generally. So the demand there depends on proactive policy direction to address growth constraints.
I think Cassie has a question here. Cassie? We can't hear you.
No, it's okay. I think the time passed, but I was just saying to whoever made the comment that they'd like to know what like communities' ideas are of industrial jobs, that I would love to join that conversation as well. So,
okay,
some point.
Okay.
Try to get more into those details next month. And then last slide on general trends, looking at recession. This slide shows growth trends over the last 20 years in the Tri-County area by the 3 counties. So Multnomah County are the blue line on the top, and Washington and Clackamas County below. The main takeaway from this is that Multnomah County has been more, we've lost more jobs during the recessions, and we've grown jobs faster during the upswings. We've been more cyclical than the rest of the region. So the current trends are like that. Despite in the Great Recession losing a lot more jobs than the other 2 counties, we had faster overall job growth rate peak to peak. So we made up for those losses in Multnomah County. And potentially we can do that too, but we're not yet. We're not there yet. We're currently, we have a shortfall. We're growing jobs about as fast as the rest of the region in upswing years, but we had a lot bigger hole to dig out of. About 80,000 jobs lost. Depending on how you look at the data, here from monthly data, about 80,000 jobs lost in Multnomah County and about 60,000 in the rest of the Tri-County area. Go to the next slide. I have several other slides if you have questions about recession recovery, that we can go into if you want to. But.
Just one quick question on the last one. So if I understood you right, I'm reading this right. So we dropped further down, but we haven't gotten back to where we were. But but Washington and Clackamas look like they are above their line now. Yeah. So
they're above the line right now.
And we're how much below that? 20,000 or something?
So don't you have another slide?
I have another slide that shows exactly that. Toward the end, I can get get to it. But we lost about 80,000 jobs in the county, and the other 2 counties lost about 60,000 jobs in 2
Combined.
months between February and April of 2020. And since then, we've recovered, but we haven't dug out of the hole yet. And it's mainly in the leisure and hospitality and the restaurant jobs and the hotel establishments, hotels. Back on the equity part. So I have a few slides on economic equity. Portland has had strong job growth trends to meet our prosperity goal for continuing to grow as a diverse economy. We've had pretty strong traded sector growth too for being competitive globally and nationally. We have backslid on economic equity trends, particularly in growing income inequality, in declining affordability and income self-sufficiency, and in racial income disparities that are not getting better. So addressing income inequality, these 2 slides, I put both tables into one because they are very similar. They both show income inequality. They show the mix of job growth over the last 2 business cycles. The regional trends are shown in blue, the national trends are shown in gray, and they show the mix of low wage, middle wage, and high wage jobs. The chart on the left shows all jobs in the economy. The chart on the right just shows new jobs. So it's from the same period, the same job data, that's the difference between them. So the chart on the left shows that the share of middle wage jobs is shrinking. The main takeaway from that is we've shrunk about twice as fast as the rest of as the nation. They're shrinking faster in this region. And the chart on the right is nearly all of our job growth, or middle wage job growth, has been relatively flat. There's a national trend it's kind of a U-shaped trend with flat middle wage job growth. Portland's job growth has been more J-shaped, where we've had a lot more high wage job growth. However, you go back to that previous slide, we're losing middle wage jobs, or losing the share of middle wage jobs much faster than the rest of the nation. If you break these down by the 100 largest metro areas in the country, most of the faster growth, if you take the 50 that are growing the fastest, most of those are growing a lot of middle wage jobs, healthy middle wage job growth, as fast as the overall national job growth rate of 0.8% or higher. But a lot of those, like Portland,
we can't hear. Or I can't hear.
Can anybody else hear?
I can hear.
I can hear.
I can hear.
If there's a microphone, I can try to talk into it more.
I think it's on the other end.
Okay. So most of the growing regions around the country are creating healthy middle wage job growth. However, Portland's job growth rate has been about 0.1%. I said those other regions are growing 0.8% and higher. So it is largely about a few regions that aren't growing middle wage jobs more than others. Go to the next slide. People always ask.
Can you just define middle wage jobs?
Yes, exactly. This next slide. That's the point of this slide, is because when I show the previous slide, people always ask, okay, what are middle wage jobs? And this tries to define them. This is a chart showing all of the jobs in the region in 2022, recently updated. The bubbles on those maps are occupations. Occupations are job types. The sector data I showed before are business types. These are types of jobs. The middle wage jobs are those that have a median wage between $38,000 a year and $63,000 a year in those occupations. So all of those orange bubbles are middle wage jobs. The chart shows on the vertical axis is median wage. On the horizontal axis is the share of those jobs that have employees with bachelor's degrees or higher. So the main takeaway from this slide is that jobs by wage distribution are bifurcated in the economy, that high wage jobs tend to require bachelor's degrees or higher, but only 33% of the jobs in the region actually require bachelor's degrees or higher. So for the other 2/3 of the workforce, the difference is between middle wage and high wage jobs. And the median wage difference between the low wage yellow circles and those orange jobs, circles above it, is about 50% higher median wage overall. Also, if you look at that lower bubble, the industrial portions of that lower bubble in the middle wage category, about, I think it's 59% of those jobs are in the industrial occupations in 2022. Depends on I'll look at this next month too in terms of the job growth forecast, and we can dice it in different ways, but that's the way it came out in 2022. If I go to the next slide.
Steve, I have a data usefulness question here, which is, okay, so we define middle wage as 38 to 63. Yeah. That is not a family wage job in Portland.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about what somebody actually has to make to live here and or raise a family, do we have data that considers that and where these things fall? I mean, you could even tell us what that number would be, and we could just superimpose it on this graph.
I took it out of this presentation, but I have it at the end that I can get to it.
Because I mean, I'm looking at this, our average salary then would be considered high wage, which is
right. Like
that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, if you go to the next slide, that tells more too. This slide shows the median wage within each of these occupations. This slide shows upward mobility within those. The occupations, the bigger occupations that don't require a bachelor's degree. So it shows the low wage and the middle wage jobs. The circle are most middle wage jobs. And I have the essentially quartile wages currently, 2022 data. The range of the 75th percentile, which it's the starting wage of the higher income fourth of jobs in that occupation, they range from 48,000 a year to 56,000 a year in almost 400,000 middle wage jobs in the region. So that's generally the job range, but there's significant upward mobility over career. The starting wage isn't that much different than the low wage jobs, but there's more upward mobility to the median and to the 75th percentile. So there are advantages in the median wage. There are advantages for more full-time work and generally more health insurance benefits and pensions, but arguably the bigger opportunity is the long range wage increases over the career relative to the low wage jobs, to other occupations that don't require bachelor's degrees. Go to the next slide. So racial income disparities are another trend where we don't do well. This slide shows from current data, 2021 census data, the median wage by median household income by race in the city and the region. The main takeaway from this slide is that Black incomes are only about half of white incomes, both in the city and in the region, and they're lower in the city. And other racial groups are in between. Native Americans have the next highest disparity. So we have not only a very white city, large city compared to others, but wide racial income disparities. And then if I go to the next slide. So we looked in the EOA about what types of job growth will reduce those disparities. And we looked at census data for mix of jobs by occupation, by education, and by sector. And overall results are oversimplified and showed here. I have background slides that can show you the methodology that you'll understand this better. But the takeaway here is that office jobs and especially industrial jobs are the sectors that are raising BIPOC incomes, and particularly the industrial jobs raised BIPOC incomes relative to the rest of the economy about 20%, and raised Black incomes 25%. They also raised white incomes, but not as much. The bigger advantage is there. However, the faster job growth rates in the city of Portland in the last business cycle was more in healthcare and education and restaurants especially, but retail and consumer services, and that has more the opposite effect of increasing racial income disparities and less lower BIPOC incomes relative to the rest of the economy.
So, Steve, just to make sure I'm clear on this, and I'm sure you're going to cringe at my summary here, but tell me if it's roughly right. If an individual takes a healthcare job or a retail job, essentially they're bringing down the overall job growth for BIPOC incomes.
So this is a way of comparing these fourths of the economy. So it looks at the industrial jobs versus everything else in the economy. It looks at the office jobs versus everything else in the economy.
Okay.
So it's a little bit more complicated than that, but generally so. So for particularly the retail and consumer services, it's comparing those jobs to the rest of the economy, and that's why it's so much lower. Those tend to be lower wage service jobs.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And particularly, they are overrepresented with BIPOC workers, and so they bring BIPOC wages down.
That's part of the reason the graph
That's the
is so
rationale
extreme, because they're, okay, yeah.
Within sectors, how do the disparities play out within the sector? So if you look at like industrial jobs.
So I have more slides on that at the end. I didn't include in this because I have a half hour and I'm already late, but we can get to that and I can go into it in a lot of detail. Coming down toward the end. In the EOA, much of this, the decisions about or the trends around equity and flat middle wage job growth have to do with our land use policy, our core land use policies in compact growth. This is one way of seeing that. Our land use plans tend to focus into mixed use centers and corridors and to higher density areas. This shows the wage distribution of jobs within all mixed use corridors in the city by regional wage quartile. So they have that kind of a U shape. It means they have mostly high wage jobs and low wage jobs within the city. The more we grow jobs in mixed use centers and corridors, more of our job growth will have that U-shaped wage distribution. The other are the industrial and mixed employment or back office districts, and they tend to have they have more middle wage jobs. So the more they grow, they tend to have more middle wage job growth. So partly in our land use focus on centers and corridors for growth results in constrained middle wage job growth. And if we go to the next slide, another way this happens is in overall growth capacity. This slide shows the results of the 2035 comp plan of the blue shows the light blue lines show the buildable land inventory. So the supply, the growth capacity in each of these business district types. And then the blue, the dark blue outline line shows the demand. So, and it's a range from low wage on the right or on the left to high wage on the right. So the takeaway from this is our growth capacity that we've designated in the comp plan is concentrated in high wage and low wage jobs. And then the more middle wage jobs in the industrial districts and the mixed employment districts that are more like back office are much more constrained in terms of job growth. So in this process, at our next meeting, we'll continue to have shortfalls of industrial land supply. We have a tight industrial land supply. It's controversial and difficult to add industrial land. We're proposing to go through a few scenarios for how we grow and compare the multi-objective trade-offs of those, to look at the effects on the environment, to look at effects on public health, to look at equity impacts and economic development, and to take that out to the public. So it's a hard conversation, but this equity piece is something that we haven't done as well on and that we haven't analyzed as well on, and we've tried to do better. I think that's my last.
Yes. Cassie has a question.
Would it be possible to do an overlay at some point about like what growth could look like if there were to be some intentional growth of climate or clean energy type jobs?
Yeah.
So that's the multi-objective analysis is supposed to partly do that. Yeah, a lot of those climate jobs are industrial jobs. It's changing technologies and new cleaner energy production are largely require industrial land as well. But yeah, it's diverse, and hopefully we can try to do that as best we can, is looking at multiple objectives all at the same time and show the best data we have on it.
And there's some data in the advanced Portland strategy as well.
And I think it also will require us to think about how do you proactively grow middle wage jobs in a variety of sectors that can exist in different land, districts that we have. What do you call the districts?
Business districts.
Business districts. Thank you. So, yeah, I think it's a combination of all these things, right? It's the future is looking at how do we encourage all these different kinds of jobs, the newer industry jobs where there are opportunities through the climate, the energy transition and dealing with climate issues, and thinking about where programs, funding, workforce, development, all of these different things, how can they help create a pathway to jobs that are more sustainable jobs and address the equity issues. And it seems to me at the end of the day that we have to grow the middle wage jobs in all of the different business districts as much, to the extent that's possible.
Well, making that happen in retail is a little.
Well, maybe saying all was a little.
Ideally, yes.
I do think
But
that actually
yes.
part of Cassie's question, I think goes back to Ellen's point about what do people consider to be an industrial job? Because I think it's one of the things that the Advanced Portland Plan does very well of acknowledging is that we need steel fabrication to do clean energy development, right? And so kind of that might be the future of that middle wage job. And maybe that allows for it to be parts of it to be moved to different parts of the region, but it still requires industrial land. So I think your point is a good one. And I think the real question is, what are the jobs in those other sectors that are middle wage? Because I listened to what you just said, which is if we grow in these places, we're going to grow in a J shape. We're not going to grow. So we have to identify even what those jobs are before we can determine how to grow them.
And I think that's the crossover between sort of what the EOA is about and that basic industrial land supply, and it can be for climate jobs or warehouse jobs or barge manufacturing jobs or ship repair jobs, versus the Advanced Portland that has the climate tech strategy that we want those green climate jobs and those solar panel manufacturers or whoever. That's where you get the more of that focus from those other programs. But the EOA says, yeah, there's land for you to land in, and put that building up to or not.
Yeah, I think maybe our job is a little bit easier perhaps, because it always bothers me a little bit when any entity, in this case, Prosper Portland, says, these are the good jobs. Yeah. What we're doing is looking at more basics like land supply and saying, our land supply is getting in the way of growing those middle wage equitable jobs. So let's try and remove that barrier and let them grow and not worry too much about whether, it's this particular type of job or that particular type of job. I shouldn't say type of job.
I think the challenge though is we don't grow land, right? We grow how we use the land, but we don't get more
Available
acres to deal with unless we do things like unlock what's
Take
in
over
the super
Hillsborough.
fund or brownfields. But I think that's where it's a combination of what is the regional,
Yes.
are we trying to account for all the need of the region? Are we willing to consider a different, alternative or prospect? Yeah, I mean, these are all things that, this is the nature of the conversation.
Bob?
Yeah, I'm curious, Steve. One of the things we're seeing right now is there's this huge pressure. I hear it all the time. We need to make it easier to convert industrial land for housing. I'm just curious how much we've really articulated, or how much we should be articulating the fact that if people don't have jobs, how much the housing crisis is driven by the lack of jobs and the lack of income, what Bento was talking at. Because I think that's it keeps popping up in my brain as you go through this, that that's really the bigger challenge right now than sort of the environmental side. It's the upzoning. And I know that, for example, when I was at Audubon, we fought the conversion of Terminal 2 for housing with the idea that we
Or
can't
a
be
baseball field.
What's that? Yeah, a baseball field.
Yeah.
That we can't be pulling this land out for housing. The housing needs to come somewhere else. It's density in neighborhoods and things like that, rather than upzoning. Same thing in the post office district and even South Waterfront, where we're in this race to move things out of industrial usage. And so I guess I'm just curious how much that connection has really been teased out.
But I think I would just say that I don't think, again, what we talked about before, those decisions were made some time ago, right? To take land that was formerly industrial and allow them to be used in other ways. Right now, other than Montgomery Park, there isn't a push to convert industrial land to jobs, to housing. I think there's.
I disagree with you on that.
Okay, let's talk about that, because that I'm aware of. I think there's a push to think about central city revitalization and how areas that have a lot of, predominantly office or jobs have not had the kind of diversity of activity to make them resilient through the pandemic and the things we've just gone through. But that's what I'm aware of. So if I
think Bob and I can whip you up a list pretty quickly. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like we've been fighting it continually, honestly, on small sites and then in bigger landscapes. Sorry.
Oh, no, I a little bit different of a topic, but I wanted to ask if we could, I think there's an impression also about the public health aspect of jobs, and that there's a general impression that industrial uses affect health, and also industrial jobs somehow affect health. But there's documents out there that show that public health is improved with the growth of income. The higher your income, the more healthy you can live a life. And, this is just a small piece of this bigger discussion, but I think it's an important piece too to bring in to this conversation.
In our last meeting, I think that's the topic, is multiple trade-offs and advantages and disadvantages of different scenarios.
So I don't know if there's a question in here, but in where I come from in the Yakima Valley and Yakima County, it's sort of interesting. We don't measure our warehouses by square feet, it's by acres. And a lot of our stuff is, ag. But we've had a huge shift, and I don't know if you guys are having this, where we'll have a huge warehouse that's measured in acres, but you have like 3 people manning this area because everything's much more automated. And so I don't know if there's any parallel in terms of, like, if an industry comes in and they take up a bunch of land, if there's something that holds them to a certain number of jobs associated with that, where you're not just having the land that supports the functionality but doesn't give you those jobs.
Can we get out?
Get out.
Can we get out without you?
Yes, you
We can
can.
go down, we
You
just
can
couldn't
go down.
up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can bring some of that back in terms of like the
Yeah.
job density of different types of uses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great discussion, everybody.
Yeah.
I think some of us. have to
Thank you
go.
very much. Cassie, did you have a question? Your hand came up and down.
It was just in connection to the comment about health and jobs and health outcomes for workers. And I mean, if we're going to talk about health,
Okay.
we should have an overlay about like the health of existing industrial jobs as well in the work environment. Like how safe are those jobs?
Yeah, okay. All right, well, thank you everyone who joined us online. We'll see you in 3 weeks. We will try and get you information ahead of time like we did this time. And we'll do it again.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
This is great.
Yeah, fascinating discussions.
Question 2, and this is where I get. Where it gets complicated.
It's good to see you.
Oh, I'm on the subject break.
I think you want to stop.